Hey everyone, I'm Ryan, the host of the Roast West Coast Coffee podcast. I host the show on Anchor by Spotify. If you haven't heard of it, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything that you need all in one place. Anchor has the tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. I host on Anchor because it distributes my podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so many more, making it easier for me to spend my time interviewing guests and drinking coffee. Anchor is everything you need to make a podcast all in one place, and best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 8 of the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast. I'm Ryan Wolt, and this is the show where I bring you the stories of coffee professionals, entrepreneurship, and coffee education. Today is one of those education days, particularly geared to the coffee professional or aspiring cafe owner looking to create a more efficient coffee bar. That said, anyone who deals with a small kitchen will get a lot out of this episode too. Today's Coffee Smarter expert is Alden Hazuri. If you listen to the show, you may recognize that name. Alden is the founder and head roaster of Crossings Coffee Roasters, and he is the operator of Cafe Laterre, one of this show's roast industry partners in Southern California. The Cafe Laterre shops are a collaborative business effort with Salon World Suites, a chain of salon co-working spaces. The coffee shops can be found inside the salons, and as such are given a very, very small footprint to work with. Alden's going to walk us through the process from concept to layout to adapting to the unanticipated consequences of putting this thing there and that thing over here. As for me, this morning I'm drinking a pour-over cup of Ethiopia that I brewed as a V60, and I'm using my new gooseneck water kettle, which I'm very excited about. I'm going to take this cup and sit on the steps under the overhang, and I hope wherever you are, you decide to brave the outdoors a little bit too today. But if not, that's okay too, because the weather be pretty crazy everywhere. It was so hot in SoCal this week, I actually went to sleep with ice packs, and I invested in some cans of cold brew for the mornings. Wherever you are, I hope that your coffee mug is full, and you're ready to get coffee smarter today with Alden Hazuri of Crossings Coffee Roasters and Cafe Laterre on this episode of the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast. Why don't we get started real quick and I know you've been on the show before, some of the listeners know you, but some don't. Do us a favor and say, just let us know what your name is and what it is that you do in the world of coffee.
My name is Alden Hazuri, and I do a little bit of everything in coffee. I think kind of like what you were alluding to before, my goal is to kind of build an empire, but not for myself. The goal is to kind of build this empire with maintaining the three principles of how I live my life and how I run my businesses. And those pillars are foundations of kindness, community, and in the pursuit of excellence. The way I try to manifest or instill these virtues is through a few different branches of my business, one of which is a roasting side. I wholesale, I source, and curate coffees specific for shops and whatever, or restaurants kind of to match the flavor profile that they're seeking. I have a consulting branch where I do help and offer support, training, QC, bar flow management, everything that it takes to kind of get to the nitty gritty, and even as far back out as scale development of businesses. And within that, I have been more recently involved with helping several shops open up, develop, manage their own coffee concepts. The biggest of which right now is a chain of cafes that I'm currently building for a company in San Diego called Cafe Laterre. The concept is kind of like a joint mixed space with a salon. So our cafes are inside of a high-end kind of boutique salon We've got a bunch of locations across the Southwest planned, currently one in Solana Beach, another in Encinitas. We'll soon be expanding up into LA, possibly out into Vegas, and looking to actually open our first standalone brick and mortar for the concept somewhere in North County, all within the next year or so.
It never ceases to amaze me when I talk to you how much stuff you have going on. Your work with Cafe Laterre is one of the reasons that I was excited to have you back on as a Coffee Smarter expert this season. The Cafe Laterre spaces are uniquely efficient. In the way that this closet that I'm sitting in is small, your cafe's footprints are very small because any extra space that those cafes take is taking away from the salon space that is also a revenue driver for that business. So you go into these one where every cafe is going to be a little bit different based on the space and the retail space that you're allotted, indoor and outdoor. And there's going to be different rules for different landlords and different, everything's going to be a little bit different. But you're also given a very small footprint. So one of the things that I was excited to talk to you about this on the show is how you go about setting up a coffee bar efficiently, because it's something you're uniquely qualified to do. And I'd like to take it all the way to kind of the very beginning of that process. When you're looking at like a blank, empty space, how do you begin to envision what it's going to look like in the future? Where does that process start for you?
That's a terrific question. I'd say for me, it really starts with looking at the menu we're trying to create. Workflows are kind of built out, born from, your menu. So if, you're trying to build a coffee concept, when I sat down with these folks, that was actually one of the first questions we talked about was what kind of cafe are we looking for? Is it just going to be coffee, tea? Are we looking to do food? Do you want an espresso bar? How much of an experience are we trying to create for not only the tenants of the salon, but also the community at large? We're not trying to pigeonhole ourselves into just serving tenants and their clients, but also, our neighbors, the residencies that are all around us. And they said enthusiastically, we want a full coffee bar. We want everything. We want to let people know that, hey, we've got a kick-ass program director. We've got an amazing menu, and you can come and rely on us for a cup of your morning Joe. So that was a little thrilling and a little also in line with I had previously helped another business in San Diego open up a tiny little coffee corner inside of an existing business. And through that experience, I was able to kind of get a better feel for what ergonomically is really important for not only storage and where equipment's going to go, but like the specific placement of each equipment. How we can make sure one person can kind of man or woman or personify, as many stations as possible without scrambling or running back and forth to, knock out drinks. So when I sat down, I actually used like a kind of like a cheaper version of, kind of like a CAD software to kind of just like render out what the space would look like. I even got little paper cutouts just to make sure that, I could move things around and see what would make sense, and kind of putting myself into the position of whoever's standing behind bar. With the first location that we opened up in Solana Beach, there was an added level of complexity because they had also wanted to open up a window, kind of like a serving window. So not only would we have a point of sale facing inwards inside the salon, but another one pointed outside to the community at large.
Let me interrupt you just to clarify something for anyone listening. That Solana Beach space that you're talking about right now, can you give us an idea of roughly what the square footage of that inside footprint is?
I can give you an exact square footage. It's 199 square feet.
Okay, so 199 square feet is very small when you are thinking about the size of a cafe. So, okay, so knowing that we're playing with that sub 200 number, I'll let you continue. Apologies for the interruption.
Oh, totally fine. So we've got, a list of all of my equipment that I'm going to need. Okay, if we're doing an espresso bar, I need an espresso machine. I need an espresso grinder. I probably need a decaf grinder. I'm going to need a coffee brewer, because when you're working with a space that small, usually you're going to be working with one person, maybe two people max at a time. I don't really want to take time away for them to stop and do pour overs or French press. I need automation, but I need automation, again, with excellence in mind. So I already had that equipment picked out. I'd like to do a water tower so I can have hot water ready for teas. Oh, we're a cafe concept. I need a 3-comp sink. I need floor drains. I need a refrigerator. I need a grab and go for things like bars and juices and things like that. So very quickly, you're able to kind of build out what is all the equipment I'm going to need. And then I started looking at like building code and ADA, Disabilities Act requirements for spaces as well. What kind of materials do we need to use? All these different things. And then also, the added level of complexity in cost effectiveness as well. We were a brand new concept. We were opening up in the middle of COVID. And even though we had full faith that, with a good product and a good service, build it and they will come, comes to mind. But to kind of take an already tiny space, fit all the equipment that we need, keep in mind building codes, and again, these ADA compliances really starts to, I would even say it makes things a little easier because there isn't a whole lot of flexibility on what you're able to do. Oh, this fridge needs to go over here. Oh, actually, we can't put it up there. We need to get an under counter because the upright would take away from counter space that we could use for food prep. The three comp sink, okay, well, getting a full lengthwise, straight line takes up a lot of space. If I get an L shape, I can stuff that in the corner and I can build a pony wall so that my espresso machine can go next to it and I don't have to worry about splash over from the sink next. All these different things start coming to mind. So I kind of position myself in one space and, okay, what am I doing? Where am I knocking my portafilter out? Where's my trash bin going to go? Where can I reach more easily to have teas accessible? Okay, cool. I'm going to pivot around. Okay, milks. If I'm doing this, 100 times a day, that could get a little overwhelming. So I want to move the refrigerator a little over this way so I can get that to be even more efficient for when someone's, 17 tickets deep and they're trying to, catch up again. And so slowly you kind of whittle down side by side until you're left with more or less a rough shape on what the space is going to look like, where equipment's going to go. And the next level is to kind of apply the things like counter height. And then, okay, I've got this much counter space available for my espresso bar. How am I going to set up my espresso machine? Where are my arms going to go? What makes most sense for me to, knock the portafilter out or brush it out, grab another dose of espresso. And I kind of just play with these things in my head and try to think about if I'm doing this 20 times, 50 times, 100 times a day, how can I drop into a good rhythm that doesn't take away or create disruptions in keeping up with demand we might have?
And all the while that you're thinking about that, you are also have to be aware of what the user experience will be, which is kind of a web term. But in real life, you're talking about what are people going to see when they're standing at the counter? What are people going to see when they're standing at the window? The window, I think, is something that maybe you wouldn't think about at first if you weren't in this position regularly, but by having that window, you're also taking away from space that you could have something above counter height, because people need to be able to see in that huge window that people come up to and get their food and their coffee and their whatever from. Has to be clear and open. So you at the Solana Beach location, which I've been to, you have two separate lines of sight for customers, one inside and one outside, and you have to be aware of both. So when you're setting up your coffee bar efficiently, you're not only thinking about how, and tell me if I'm wrong here, you're not only thinking about how it will be for your barista who's doing all these things and how efficient it will be for them, but you're thinking about how it looks from a visual standpoint.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. So that kind of, for me, falls under my category in the pursuit of excellence. And, I use the word pursuit of excellence because I don't think you're ever going to always just be excellent. We're in a constantly flowing and dynamic landscape. And so if we're always in the pursuit of it, it kind of gives space for curiosity and to improve upon what we've already created. So to your point, being mindful about the customer experience is a whole other rabbit hole. I absolutely love going down. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what is this person thinking of when they're waking up and being like, I need a cup of coffee? Who are the first shops that come to mind? Maybe they're going to Google coffee shops in my area. All right, great. How do we get to the top of that list? How do we become the most visible? And let's say they do happen to choose us and they come on through. What is their experience when they first walk up and perceive us? What do we look like? What is the setup? Is it organized? Is it clean? Is it messy? Is it chaotic? How do we kind of not hide, but shield away parts that maybe take away from their perceived experience of what they're about to participate in? From the salon side of things, I have a glass wall that kind of extends out to block people's view of like the three comp sink, because I don't know, I'm making an assumption here, but some people might be a little, that's, a bit of a turnoff to see, sinks with dishes or cleaning solutions, things like that. And from the other side, how do I also make sure that whoever's from the window can still get a clean shot of the espresso machine? Oh, I also really love the look of this grinder. I think it's a bit of a showpiece. Where can I position that so when people see, they'd be like, wow, that is a really strange piece of equipment. What is that? Great talking point. Let me tell you all about it. And it goes on and on until it comes down to how are we preparing the drink? How do we kind of bring in a little bit of the theatrics and the beauty when it comes to pulling a shot, tamping it, steaming milk, pouring it so it's in view of whoever's either at the counter inside or at the window outside. And then the delivery, what does the cup look like? What do the lids look like? Make sure they fit properly. How are we handing it off to them? I want to make sure that we're on their mind throughout this entire process. And when they finally finish that cup and toss or recycle it, what is that final sip for them like? I think that's a big part of also that experience as well. I don't want that last sip to be the thing they remember the most, because if it's a big drink and they get to that last sip, it might be cold. Maybe the espresso shot died. Maybe some of the milk separated, and that last sip might be representative to their entire experience. How do we greet them? How do we maintain conversation? What does the exit look like? These are all different pieces that come into play with curating that experience for them.
The idea that you're thinking about the last sip is really interesting to me because I always remember places by my first sip, by my first engagement. And that first moment of, oh, yeah, this is what I wanted, or oh, no, this isn't, or walking in and seeing, you know, tables that aren't clean or whatever. Over the last couple of years, I've actually adjusted what my expectations of hospitality are, because there has been, in addition to COVID, COVID limits some things, and a changing workforce has changed, how much we can do, how much a business can do in the space that they have with how many employees they have. And so maybe my expectations were predicated on my experience in hospitality pre-COVID. And so I had to adjust that. But the idea that you're thinking about their last sip being the one that is the most important, and I go into it thinking about the first, I would also kind of change track a little bit, and just as you're talking about this, you kind of referenced it earlier as you're thinking about the layout and the setup, how many times you're going to do this. I think replication is something people forget about. There are some very beautifully designed restaurants, in particular in the San Diego area, that I've been to, that are very clearly not designed by anyone who's ever worked in a restaurant. And I don't know how to say that without it kind of sounding like a dig, and it's not, because they're so beautiful, it's worth the experience. But when you are doing something over and over and over again and trying to maintain consistency, that gets more difficult when the steps to complete an activity are greater. And so, for an example, if you need to turn, and you can tell me how you try to figure this part out. I think having a small space helps, but if I'm taking an order at the window and then I have to turn to the grinder to grind the beans, and that takes me 2.5 steps, that is an extra second both ways where I'm not engaged or I'm not looking out at my customer, or that it's taking between customers. Now, that doesn't sound like much. And if it's a slow day, it's probably not. But if there's 20 people in line and that last person in line is now waiting an extra 2 or 3 minutes, that could be enough to inspire them to go across the street. And, it might change their experience. And for my barista, those extra 2 steps are now multiplied. That's an extra 500 steps. No, I'm getting tired faster. I'm getting sore faster. It doesn't sound like much, but you just have to think about it in terms of multiplication. Tamping, if you're tamping the wrong way 100 times a day, 5 days a week, you will eventually blow your elbow out or your wrist. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how do you think about that in terms of, you've already referenced how you think about it in terms of how the customer sees things. How do you do that in terms of your staffs, your employees?
Another amazing question. So when I'm interviewing for these locations, it's nice to have someone come up to me with coffee experience, Starbucks or a local cafe or, a Java Shack, wherever you're coming from. If you know, give a damn, pardon my language, about what you're doing, and you have that show up factor that, you know what, I'm investing my time into something, and my time is something I value. So I'm going to show up with everything I got. Like that X factor is the thing I look for first and foremost. So even if you don't have experience and you're just passionate about wanting to show up, I can work with that. And I want to hinge on that point because I'll get people coming in and thinking, I know what I'm doing. I've been in coffee for 5 years. I've been in coffee for 7 years. Like I know how to pull a shot. And I'm sure they do. And I do a few things differently. And they might be exposed to something that maybe they haven't seen before. So when they come on board and we agree, we're like, yeah, we think we'd be a good fit. The chemistry feels right. They're not immediately just like thrown on bar, by themselves and left to their devices. It's they drop into what I call kind of like a 2 week intensive training period. And this is a two-way street for us both to kind of gauge and assess where we're at. They might have experience and I want to see what areas they might need support or opportunities for growth in. They might even want to be able to see what the scope of this working space would look like. Like with most employment, it's blanking on the word right now, but basically there's no commitment. They could realize, you know what, I thought I'd like this and I don't. I'm so sorry. And that's totally fine. I want to be able to know that earlier ahead of time before we invest time in each other, before realizing that you're not really enjoying your time here or we're not feeling like the dynamic is working out here. But that 2 week intensive training is really kind of like if you're ever played sports in high school, it's kind of like a hell week where we're going to be doing things over and over and over again because I want to see how's your tampling look? What is your body posture when you're steaming milk? What's your body posture when you're pouring? I've seen some people come in and they're like, you know, contorting themselves to try to pour this cup so that the customer can see what they're pouring. And, I'm looking at their back. I'm like, oh my God, your back. I feel so bad for your back. Like, relax, like shake it out. Like, we're good. Like, let's try reframing and reprogramming a lot of these ways that you've been used to doing things and create something that's more posturally comfortable, looks a little bit more presentable and professional, and will give you the longevity you need to get through an entire day. Because that repetition does really add up, especially in such a tight space where you might be doing a lot of the same like micro kind of explosive movements, bending over, opening the door, pulling milk out, throwing milk back in. These things, they do stack up and compound over the course of a day. And it's important to like recognize what are the areas that might wear out the fastest. And you brought up a point earlier when you've got like 20 people in line, for days like that, I did build the space or these spaces with the ability to be able to fit two people inside at a time to make it even hyper efficient. So one person's, running the window, the other person's running the actual machine. And at that point, we get to practice communication. It's always like my heart hums and my ears feel like it's gold when I'm gonna kind of I'm watching them work, and I'll hear one person taking an order at the window and I'm watching the person on espresso already starting to hear it. Like they already know what's going on. They're already attuned to what's going on at the window. They can start preparing ahead of time because they know the earlier they start on this drink, the more prepared they'll be for the drink after that and after that and after that.
Yeah, that's the barista shuffle. You have to learn that.
Exactly.
When we're talking about 200 square feet, your actual barista space may be 3 feet by 5 feet, if that, of space that they are adjusting each other around.
Yeah.
It can be a very tight space. I think for the year that I did spend as a barista, we stood on a platform that had a rubber mat on it to help protect our joints, but it was 28 inches by I think 60 inches. That was the space that we had, and we would sometimes have 3 employees on there working, simultaneously. So you learn to be very quick to you learn each other's movements, and some people move in a different way, and as an employee, it's important to know that's the case. I want to recap before I get lost or I lose the thread, but in the beginning, you are looking at an empty space and essentially working on a layout based on the equipment list that you have and trying to keep in mind. In that case, you were doing it on a CAD program. You might actually be doing it on a piece of paper. I think a lot of times cafes start on the back of a napkin or in a notebook, and you kind of start drawing out sinks and tables and things, and then go into 3 dimensions. So you're keeping in mind the physical layout. You're keeping in mind the visual layout that both a customer and employee might have. You're keeping in mind how to do the job to the best quality as efficiently as possible to try to limit problems or concerns not just injury from repetitive injury, but I'm thinking of like if my milk is down over here and to get it, I have to reach around a door, or the door opens awkwardly, I might spill that milk once a week. Well, now that's a gallon of milk I've lost and time lost to a mess. And I feel like there was a fourth thing. What was the fourth thing?
I'd say like building code.
Building code. That's right. The most important one if you would like to be open for business.
Yes,
And they
exactly.
don't care about the rest of these things. So you have to factor that in.
If I can offer or modify one piece of additional support, for this space, I think the one thing that was helpful, because there's not going to be like a recipe just to follow steps A through G and you hit success. Yeah, it's very much trial and error. Like I can't tell you how many hours I spent starting down one path or like building layout, and then 16 hours in, I realized there's a critical flaw or something we're not going to be able to work around. I've got to scrap it and start all over again. But starting with like the things that you can't change. So when I came into that space, that building was already built out. We couldn't retrench, we couldn't move the window. That window was already there. The floor drains were already there. So that kind of, again, it did restrict what flexibility I had, but it also did give me a few seeds to start from. Like, okay, obviously this is where we're starting here. What can I do to build out from this concept? And then everything else kind of falls into place. So even though they're restrictive, they offer as kind of like a filter. So filter out all the options that don't work, and I just get to work with the ones that do. And then you kind of massage it for the gold for all the ergonomics we talked about before.
A few months ago, I had stopped by the newest Cafe Later location in Encinitas, and that day you were dialing in a Guatemala coffee that you roasted with your company, Crossings Coffee Roasters. It's been all summer since then. How did that coffee turn out for you? And two, what are you drinking and roasting these days that you're getting excited about? And I should say that a lot of your roasted coffee is what is being served in Cafe Later currently.
Yeah, that coffee turned out great. It's something that there's a fine line. I have my preferences on the cup of coffee I like to roast or the cup of coffee I like to drink, and then there's also kind of a pandering is not the right word, but I had to look at what our demographic is drinking, what do they like, and what's a coffee that, again, being mindful of the consumer experience, something that matches the flavor profile they enjoy, something that's in line with what I can stand behind, something that matches the rest of our menu, pairs well with syrups, pairs well with the milks that we're choosing. And that ultimately ends up being a coffee that is not a dark roast, but a little darker than how I typically like to roast. And so it's been kind of a work in progress to dial that coffee in. And at the same point, trying to be mindful of knowing that that's a coffee or a varietal or a region that I can source from consistently. I love how some shops are able to rotate through. I'm envious, if anything, actually. Like this month's special is going to be a Peruvian, Peabody, or next month is a Kenya Double A, and be able to have that rotational coffees on hand. We found in our polls and our studies when kind of walking through the neighborhoods that they wanted something consistent, something they could get that tasted the same in March as it does in December. And I don't want to buy a container full of coffee and have it sit. I think over the span of 8-9 months, that coffee will probably be fine. But I do want to make sure that the coffee we're sourcing is as fresh as possible, and but still matches the menu that they've come to expect. So fast forward to now, I'm loving that Guatemala. I'm actually sipping on a Colombia right now. Actually sipping on my Colombia espresso right now, which is a coffee that I roast dark enough for espresso, but light enough that if you want to brew it on like a French press or something that has a little bit more of like that full immersion type effect, it does pull through with a nice, solid, punch to the face.
Well, I certainly appreciate that punch to the face every morning. It helps get me going. Alden, I really appreciate you coming and being on the show again and taking some of that time. I'm not sure when you sleep actually with all the roasting and the operations and the planning, and I know there's the future things. I'm going to assume that you've got that all figured out and you've got some sort of diamond system that you sleep in at night to help rejuvenate you, a la
Um,
an
you should
old
try
terrible Bond movie. Thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to having you back on the show. We're going to talk about some of the equipment next week that you were setting up today in our chat, and I'll swing down and try that Columbia.
I can't wait. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Okay, to recap. The creation of an efficient coffee bar means being aware of human impact and movement within a physical space. If you're building out a cafe, you also need to consider the rules and regulations put upon you by the health department and building codes. If you're at home, you'll need to be more concerned about space and convenience and space. I said space twice because we have a very small kitchen, and we're constantly making choices about what stays out on the counter and what doesn't. Success in your efforts towards efficiency will come with trial and error. Alden recommends starting with things you can't change, for example, where a drain is, or what power outlets you may have to work around. It is kind of like playing a real-life minesweeper. Don't be afraid to adapt as you go. The 3 pillars that Alden runs his life and his businesses by are kindness, community, and the pursuit of excellence. The parameter of those ideals will be a little bit different for everyone, but I do think it helps to have an ethos or a motto to fall back on when you're confronted with decisions, both in business and in life. That's all for today's show. Alden will be back again next week to continue our journey into coffee smarterness, coffee smartening, growing our coffee intelligence. I think that's the right one. This show's industry partners include the aforementioned Cafe Laterre, as well as Coffee Cycle Roasting, Ignite Coffee Company, and First Light Whiskey. Don't forget to use the discount code RWC on barbank.com to get 15% off your order of First Light Coffee Whiskeys. That's RWC, all capital letters, on barbank.com. I'll add that link in the show notes and on roastwestcoast.com. I also want to thank our partners Maria Coffee, Ascend Coffee Roasters, Cape Horn Coffee Importers, Camp Coffee Company, and Steady State Coffee Roasting, who, besides being a top-notch roastery and cafe, are hiring. If you're looking for a job in coffee and you live in North County, San Diego, I know that is a very specific portion of the audience, you can apply by sending your resume to hello@steadystateroasting.com, and if you get the job, I will definitely see you there. If you are listening to this show for the first time and you want more coffee content, head to roastwestcoast.com, sign up for the free or paid newsletters, and be awesome. Thank you all for listening and for supporting the show. This episode of the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast has been written, produced, and recorded by me, Ryan Wolt. I hope this episode has found you happy, healthy, and with at least enough sanity to make it through the day. Always tip your baristas and be sure to drink good coffee. Hey there, thanks for sticking around. I'll see you in a couple days with part 2 of the interview with Ryan Espy and David Elizondo of First Light Whiskey.